Imagine this. You are walking through the city on an ordinary morning. You stop at a coffee shop, order your usual, and sit down to check your phone. A stranger sits across from you, short, stocky, slightly odd-looking, and smiles. "Excuse me," he says. "Can I ask you something?" You shrug.
Shrug. To raise both shoulders briefly to show you do not know or do not care. Example, you shrug. Sure, why not? And just like that, a 2-hour philosophical conversation begins.
Sure, why not? "What is justice?" he asks. You laugh a little. Easy question. You explain what justice means to you. Fairness, people getting what they deserve, the law treating everyone equally. He nods slowly. Interesting. And would you say that returning what you borrow is always just? Of course, you say. Even if, he continues, leaning forward slightly, your friend lent you a knife yesterday, and today he has lost his mind and is asking for it back. You pause. Returning the knife to a madman would cause harm. That doesn't seem just at all. But you just said returning what you borrow is always just. I see, he says, watching you with calm, patient eyes. So perhaps justice is more complicated than we initially thought. You feel something you haven't felt in a long time, genuinely, uncomfortably uncertain about something you were absolutely sure you understood 5 minutes ago. The stranger finishes his coffee, stands up and says, "Thank you. This has been most illuminating." And he walks out into the street, barefoot, to find his next conversation. That stranger was Socrates, and what just happened to you has been happening to people for 2,500 years. Welcome, my friends, to the story of the most dangerous philosopher who ever lived, a man who never wrote a single word, a man who owned almost nothing, a man who was sentenced to death, not for violence, not for theft, not for treason, but for asking questions. And a man whose questions are still, right now, today, shaking the foundations of everything we think we know. Let us get one thing clear from the start. Socrates was not what you picture when you think of a great philosopher. He was not elegant. He was not wealthy. He was not the kind of man who looked impressive at dinner parties. Unless, of course, you count the time he outdrank everyone at a symposium, walked home at dawn completely sober, and went straight to the agora to start philosophizing. Which he did, regularly. Socrates was born in Athens around 470 BC, a city that was, at that moment, the most intellectually alive place on earth. The Parthenon was being built. Sophocles was writing his plays. Democracy, the wild, chaotic, revolutionary idea that ordinary citizens should govern themselves, was being invented in real time. And into this extraordinary world came a short, broad-nosed, perpetually barefoot stonemason's son who would become the most irritating person in the city. His mother was a midwife. His father carved stone. Socrates himself, in his youth, carved stone too, and apparently with some skill. But stone, it turned out, was not what he was meant to shape. Ideas were. He served in the Athenian army, and here is our first remarkable anecdote. During a brutal winter campaign, soldiers were desperately wrapping themselves in anything they could find against the cold. Socrates walked through the snow barefoot, in his single thin robe, apparently unbothered, while heavily wrapped soldiers shivered beside him. They were astonished. He was, by all accounts, mildly puzzled by their astonishment. Physical discomfort, he had decided, was simply not very interesting. What was interesting, what was for Socrates the only thing genuinely worth his attention, was the state of people's souls, by which he meant something specific. Not their spiritual health in a religious sense, but the quality of their thinking, the honesty of their self-knowledge, the coherence of their values. And so, while other men built careers and accumulated wealth and pursued political power, Socrates did something else entirely. Every day he went to the agora, the public marketplace of Athens, the beating social heart of the city, and he talked to people, politicians, soldiers, poets, craftsmen, wealthy merchants, young aristocrats, anyone who would stop. And then he asked them questions. Now here is the thing about Socratic questions. They did not feel dangerous at first. They felt almost friendly, even flattering, because they implied that the person being questioned had something worth examining. A general would be asked what courage was. A judge would be asked what justice meant. A poet would be asked to explain the deeper meaning of his work. And then, with the patient, methodical precision of a surgeon removing stitches, Socrates would dismantle their answer, not aggressively, not mockingly, but relentlessly. He would find the internal contradiction. He would identify the assumption that didn't hold. He would ask the follow-up question that revealed the previous answer was incomplete. And he would keep going until the person arrived at the same place everyone always arrived at eventually. Complete and utter confusion about something they had been absolutely certain they understood. He called this the beginning of wisdom. Most people called it infuriating.
Infuriating. Something that makes you genuinely, deeply angry. Not just mildly annoyed, but truly furious. Example, his calm smile while destroying your argument was, for most people, completely infuriating.
One of the best stories that captures Socrates perfectly involves the oracle at Delphi, the most sacred prophetic site in the ancient world. A friend of Socrates went to the oracle and asked whether anyone in Athens was wiser than Socrates. The oracle said no. When Socrates heard this, he was genuinely baffled. He knew he wasn't wise, so he set out to disprove the oracle by finding someone wiser than himself. He went to the politicians and discovered that although they spoke confidently about everything, they couldn't justify any of it under examination. He went to the poets and found that although they wrote beautiful things, they had no idea what their own work meant. He went to the craftsmen and found that their genuine technical skill had convinced them they understood things far beyond their craft. At the end of this investigation, Socrates reached a conclusion that is simultaneously humble and devastating. The oracle was right, not because Socrates was wise, but because he was the only one who knew that he wasn't. This, he decided, was his mission. Assigned by the god, non-negotiable, non-stoppable. To wander Athens like a gadfly.
Gadfly, a small insect that bites and irritates animals, used by Socrates to describe himself as the necessary creature that stings society into wakefulness. Example, nobody likes the gadfly, but without it, the horse just stands still.
That small, irritating insect that lands on a comfortable horse and stings it into wakefulness, and prevent the city from falling into the sleep of unchallenged certainty. He did this for decades, barefoot, without pay, without stopping, until in 399 BC, Athens had had enough. He was put on trial, the charges, impiety toward the gods and corrupting the youth of Athens. The jury, 501 of his fellow citizens. His defense, one of the most extraordinary speeches in the history of human thought. He told the jury he had done nothing wrong, that his mission came from the god and could not be abandoned, that even if they offered to free him in exchange for his silence, he would refuse, because an unexamined life was not worth living. They found him guilty. When asked to propose a penalty, he suggested, with characteristic irony, that perhaps he deserved free meals for life as a public benefactor. The jury, not amused, voted for death.
Amused, to find something funny or entertaining, but its real power is in the negative form. Not amused means actively, coldly displeased. Example, the jury, not amused, voted for death.
His friends arranged an escape. He refused to go. He had lived by the laws of Athens, he said. He would die by them too. On his final day, surrounded by weeping friends, Socrates bathed, said goodbye to his family, and returned to philosophical conversation. When the jailer brought the hemlock,
A highly poisonous plant whose extract was used in ancient Athens as a method of execution, causing slow numbness rising through the body. Example, Socrates drank the hemlock as calmly as if it were a cup of wine.
the poison that would kill him, he took the cup calmly, drank it without hesitation, and lay down. His last words were a reminder to pay a small debt to a friend. He was 70 years old. He died as he had lived, with complete equanimity, moderate irony, and an absolute refusal to pretend that anything was other than it was. Now, my friends, let us talk about what Socrates actually believed, because his philosophy is both simpler and more radical than most people expect. He left no written texts. Everything we know comes through his students, primarily Plato, whose dialogues preserve Socratic conversations with extraordinary vividness, and Xenophon, who gave us a slightly less dazzling, but perhaps more accurate picture of the man. From these sources, three central ideas emerge that define Socratic philosophy. The first, know thyself.
Thyself, an archaic, old and no longer everyday, form of yourself, found in Shakespeare, the Bible, and famous historical quotations. Example, know thyself simply means know yourself.
These two words, inscribed above the entrance to the oracle at Delphi, were, for Socrates, the beginning of everything. Before you can know anything about the world, you need to know yourself. Your assumptions, your biases, your desires, your fears, and, above all, the limits of your knowledge. The great enemy for Socrates was not ignorance itself. It was the ignorance that does not know itself, the confident certainty of the person who does not know what they do not know. This kind of ignorance is doubly dangerous. It prevents learning, because the person who is certain they already understand has no motivation to examine further, and it leads to catastrophically bad decisions because it mistakes the map for the territory, the comfortable belief for the complex reality. The Socratic cure for this condition was examination, honest, rigorous, relentless examination of one's own beliefs, not to destroy them, but to test them. The beliefs that survived genuine examination were worth keeping. The ones that didn't? Well, better to discover that now than to build a life on foundations that couldn't bear weight. The second, the unexamined life is not worth living. This is perhaps the most famous thing Socrates ever said, and it is both more personal and more demanding than it first appears. He was not saying that unintelligent people live worthless lives. He was not making an elitist claim about the superiority of philosophers. He was making a claim about authenticity, about the difference between living deliberately, by values you have genuinely examined and chosen, and living on autopilot, by values you have simply absorbed from your environment without ever questioning them. The examined life is not necessarily a more comfortable or more successful life by conventional measures. It is often less comfortable because examination regularly reveals inconvenient truths. But it is, Socrates argued, the only life in which you are genuinely the author of your own choices, the only life in which you are truly free. The third, virtue is knowledge.
Virtue, moral excellence, a quality of character like honesty or courage that makes someone genuinely good, not just successful. Example, patience is a virtue.
This is the most counterintuitive of Socrates' central ideas, and perhaps the most interesting. He believed that no one does wrong intentionally, that all wrongdoing arises from ignorance, from a failure to genuinely understand what is good. This seems, at first, obviously wrong. We all know people who understand perfectly well that what they are doing is harmful and do it anyway. How can Socrates claim that wrongdoing is always a form of ignorance? His argument is subtle. He is not saying that wrongdoers don't know the rules. He is saying that they don't truly understand, at the deepest level, the level that actually governs behavior, what is genuinely good for them and for others. If they did, if they truly, fully understood the nature of justice, courage, and virtue, they would be incapable of choosing otherwise. Because no rational being, understanding clearly what is actually good, would choose something worse. The implication is striking. The most important thing you can do for another person is not to give them money, or power, or comfort. It is to help them understand, to help them see more clearly, to help them become, in the deepest sense, wiser. Which is, of course, exactly what Socrates believed he was doing. Every uncomfortable conversation, every painful moment of intellectual confusion, every demolished assumption, these were acts of care, of genuine, radical care for the people he questioned. And now, my friends, we arrive at the most entertaining part of our story. Because Socrates' philosophy did not stay in ancient Athens, it is alive right now, today, in the 21st century. And if Socrates were here, barefoot, broad-nosed, slightly unsettling, what would he make of our world? Let us find out. Socrates on social media. It is a Tuesday morning. Socrates has somehow acquired a smartphone. He opens Twitter, now called X, and begins to read. Within approximately 4 minutes, he has found 17 confident assertions that contain internal contradictions. He begins to reply to each one with a polite question. Interesting. You say you believe in freedom of speech absolutely. Does that include speech that deliberately destroys innocent people's lives? And if not, where exactly is the line, and how did you decide where to draw it? The original poster does not enjoy this question. Socrates moves on. He finds a politician who has declared, with great confidence, that their economic policy will definitely solve inequality. Socrates replies, "Could you clarify what you mean by inequality? And how exactly will you measure whether it has been solved? And who decides what counts as a solution?" The politician does not reply. Socrates scrolls further. He finds a post that says, "People nowadays have no values." He replies, "Which values, specifically? Who had them? When exactly did they disappear? And how do you know?" By noon, he has been blocked by 43 accounts. He is having the time of his life. Because this is exactly what Socrates would do on social media, not to be cruel, not to score points, but because the online world is perhaps the greatest explosion of unexamined, confident assertion in the history of human communication. Everyone has opinions. Almost no one has examined them. The gap between what people believe they know and what they actually know has never been wider or more public. Socrates would find it simultaneously appalling and magnificent.
Appalling. So terrible or morally shocking that it genuinely disturbs you. Far beyond simply bad. Example: the conditions in that factory were absolutely appalling.
Socrates in a Job interview. Socrates has applied for a position at a large consultancy firm. He is sitting across the desk from the interviewer, who asks the standard opening question. "So, Socrates, tell me about yourself." Socrates considers this for a moment. "That is a fascinating question," he says. "What exactly do you mean by yourself? Do you mean my professional history, my values, my way of understanding problems, or something else entirely?" The interviewer blinks. Your professional background." "Certainly. Though I should mention that I have spent the last several decades examining the assumptions of people who believe they understand things they do not understand. I have no formal qualifications. I charge no fees, and I am frequently found irritating by people in positions of authority. The interviewer makes a small note. Could I ask you something? Socrates says. What does this company actually do? And is it genuinely good? Not merely profitable, but genuinely good for the people it serves and for the broader community? The interview lasts 45 minutes. Socrates does not get the job. But the interviewer goes home that evening unable to stop thinking about the last question. She lies awake at midnight, staring at the ceiling, wondering for the first time in years whether her work is genuinely good. Socrates would consider this a success. Socrates at a dinner party. It is a Saturday evening. Socrates has been invited to dinner by a well-meaning friend. The other guests include a successful lawyer, a tech entrepreneur, a lifestyle influencer, and a retired general. Over the starter, the entrepreneur is explaining his new app, which uses artificial intelligence to optimize personal happiness. Everyone wants to be happy, he says confidently. We just help them get there faster. Socrates puts down his fork. Fascinating. What do you mean by happiness? The entrepreneur explains, positive emotions, life satisfaction, the feeling that things are going well. And is the person who feels happy always actually happy? Socrates asks. Or could someone feel deeply contented while living a life that is, in some deeper sense, not good for them? The entrepreneur is not sure where this is going. For instance, Socrates continues, a person who has never examined their values might feel perfectly content, and yet be living, in some important sense, falsely. Is that happiness, or is it a comfortable illusion? The lawyer intervenes. With respect, people have a right to define happiness for themselves. Absolutely, says Socrates pleasantly. And have you defined it for yourself? Have you examined what you actually value, as opposed to what you have been told to value, or what you have simply absorbed from your environment without questioning? The table goes quiet. By the time dessert arrives, 3 of the 5 guests are involved in the most honest conversation they have had in years. The lifestyle influencer is reconsidering her entire professional identity. The retired general is explaining, haltingly,
speaking or moving in a slow, hesitant, uncertain way, stopping and starting, as if unsure whether to continue. Example, he spoke haltingly, as if the words had been locked inside him for 30 years.
Something he has never told anyone before about a decision he made in combat 30 years ago. The host is simultaneously delighted and furious. Socrates eats his dessert with quiet satisfaction. Socrates in therapy. Picture this. Socrates has been recommended to a therapist by a concerned friend. He sits down on the couch. The therapist smiles warmly and asks, "So, what brings you here today?" "My friend believes I need help," Socrates says, "though I am not certain he is right. Could I ask, what do you mean by help?" The therapist explains, helping people feel better, process their emotions, live more fulfilling lives. And is feeling better always the same as being better? Socrates asks, could a person feel worse, more uncomfortable, more uncertain, and yet be moving toward genuine understanding and genuine virtue, in which case, would making them feel better actually be helping them? There is a long pause. Are you perhaps, the therapist says carefully, more comfortable asking questions than answering them? Socrates smiles. Now that, he says, is an excellent question. Let us examine it. They spend the rest of the session exploring whether Socrates' compulsive questioning is a philosophical method or an avoidance strategy. Socrates genuinely enjoys this. The therapist goes home and calls her own therapist. Socrates in a political debate. It is election season. 2 candidates are debating on live television. Socrates is in the audience. The moderator opens the floor for audience questions. Socrates stands up. I have a question for both candidates. He says, You have both spoken tonight about justice, about building a just society. Could each of you tell me precisely what you mean by justice, and how you would know, concretely, whether your policies had made society more just or less just? The first candidate begins a confident answer about economic equality. Socrates listens carefully. So justice for you is primarily about the distribution of material resources? Among other things, yes. And is a society just if its members have equal resources but no freedom to make their own choices? Pause. Or, Socrates continues, is freedom itself a component of justice? And if so, how do you balance equality and freedom when they conflict, as they frequently do? The second candidate intervenes. What we need is common sense, not philosophy. Socrates turns to them. Interesting. What do you mean by common sense? And how do you distinguish common sense from commonly held assumptions that have never been examined? The debate runs 40 minutes over time. Nothing is resolved. But every person watching at home has, for the first time in a long time, actually thought seriously about what they believe justice means. Socrates would consider this the best possible outcome. My friends, I want to leave you with a thought. We live in a world of extraordinary certainty. Social media feeds us content that confirms what we already believe. Algorithms show us the world we expect to see. Political discourse has become less about examining ideas and more about performing existing convictions. We are surrounded every day by confident assertion, and we are increasingly unequipped to question it. Socrates would find this terrifying and magnificent, and above all, an opportunity. Because the Socratic method is not ancient history. It is the most urgently needed intellectual tool of the 21st century. The habit of asking, what do I actually mean by this? What assumptions am I making? What would it take to convince me I am wrong? Do I actually know this, or do I merely believe it comfortably? These questions are not comfortable. They never were. They got Socrates killed. But they are the questions on which every genuine advance in human understanding has depended. In science, in law, in ethics, in politics, in every domain of human life where getting things right actually matters. The unexamined life is not worth living. That is not a claim about intelligence or education. It is a claim about honesty, about the courage to look at your own beliefs clearly, without flinching, and to follow the argument wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. Socrates spent his entire life doing this. He paid for it with his life. And 2,500 years later, his questions are still alive, still uncomfortable, still necessary, still shaking the foundations of comfortable certainty wherever they are honestly asked. Know thyself. Examine your life. Question everything, including this. Thank you so much for listening. I hope your English has grown stronger today, and I hope this story has given you something more than information. I hope it has given you a question or two that will stay with you. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and never, ever stop thinking.